Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a good afternoon. I'm Christoph Haider, President of the European Chamber of Commerce in Korea. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you, guests from Burkina Faso, China, France, Germany, Japan, Korea, Nepal, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Poland, and Thailand to our second edition of our SDG webinar series. The world has become so complex so that many of those challenges around us we cannot solve on our own. Instead, we need concerted activities, but equally important, a content exchange of best practice. It is without any doubt that we don't have no other option but to succeed. That's why I'm very happy that today we have Saori Dubourg, member of the Board of Executive Directors of the BASF SE, today with us, who will share insights about BASF, one of the most impactful chemical companies, is working on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I stop talking. I would like, without further ado now, to hand over to Saori. Saori, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph, for handing over, and thank you very much for this invitation and interest. So let me share my slides with you. Let's go there right away and let's see. Can you see it, Christoph? Just to cross-check.
Yes.
Okay, let me see. I want to put this on big screen. One moment. Okay. So I brought you an overview about what is this pattern change all about. So in its core, we have seen a lot of industry moving towards globalization over the last decades. And what we observe since many years already, in a couple of years, there is a significant paradigm shift. What is this significant paradigm shift all about? It is about a new S-curve that is evolving, driven by the Paris Climate Protocol in its core, where the new age is really at the center stage about resource intelligence at all levels. How can we use resources more cleverly, knowing that resources are limited, knowing that climate change is driving a lot of questions towards the industry. And at the center of this new S-curve, it's no longer just about volume, it's also about values. Value and also values that influence in future business models. Now, this has a significant impact on industry. I brought you some backgrounds why this trend is no longer just a local one. Now, when you look at these statements, not only the United States with Joe Biden clearly stating that he will put climate change at the agenda of the United States, he has nominated even a whole ministry around it. There's also China who has mentioned they want to go for carbon neutrality before 2060. In Europe, Mrs. von der Leyen sees Europe as an opportunity to become the first climate neutral country worldwide. And this is, and continent, and this is really by 2050. It's a really tough target for the entire industry. You know, it's for Europe one of the man of the moon moments, because there are trillions that is currently invested and triggered in order to, fuel that transformation. And this is not only true for politicians. When you look at the right-hand side, even we as a company have a very strong increase of sustainability-related requests from our customers across various industries. Now, I said, let me take the example of Europe, which is currently preparing heavily with more than 250 regulations going towards this so-called Green Deal, which is a transformational program towards SDG implementation. So the Green Deal, as Mrs. von der Leyen said, is a strategic paradigm shift towards really making a difference as the first climate neutral country. It also incorporates leading the way to circular economy, as well as the intent to move to a zero pollution environment and more sustainable food systems. So as you see, this is already addressing quite a lot of targets from the SDGs, and it has become a vision for Europe to really make a difference on these items. Now, you may wonder, what does this mean for companies? Because this is just the beginning, as I said, of this new paradigm shift towards a resource intelligent economy. Now, when we looked into the Green Deal, and this is just an example how we look at this from a strategic perspective, we looked at the different strategic levers from farm to fork, which is all about nutritional systems, the food value chain, to circular economy, sustainable transportation. And we asked ourselves, how does this impact actually a company like BASF? And what you see here is just a sample of different operating divisions. Dark blue means there's a high impact, middle blue, medium, light gray, so-so. And what you see, this whole Green Deal and this whole transformation is by now affecting the entire company. We believe if you react, you're actually too late. And this is why proactiveness is very important. We have looked at all the regulatory proposals and strategies, and we have also asked ourselves what's the risks related to it and what's the chances. Now, what is interesting when you look at the Green Deal targets, and this is just an example what the European Union wants to achieve by 2030, which you see on the left-hand side, there are quite tough targets on environmental improvement like biodiversity. If you see a reduction of chemical plant protection, for example, in the agricultural solution area. So this indirectly will also trigger new innovation markets. When we looked at the Green Deal, we found 50 to 100 new innovation markets, which is significant in terms of market potential, because all in all, the farm to fork lever of the Green Deal has a potential of more than 100 billion euro market potential. So what are these markets? Just an example, it will trigger digital services, weather-related data, to look into how can we use less spraying on the ground, be more precise, and by this improve the biodiversity on the ground, just as one example. We also see a lot of innovative farming practices like carbon farming, how to reduce CO2 on the ground. So we looked at this in much detail, and for each of the markets, we looked at the global market potential. Now here you see some of the example, what kind of new markets are triggered and what kind of innovations will come. And as you see, most of them are linked to SDGs related target, like for example, greenhouse gas emission reduction, or the way we do, alternative proteins, which will help to feed people globally. There are in total more than 3 billion more people on planet Earth that will come. But due to climate change, the industry has lost 40% of the surface already due to droughts and climate change. So there is a dilemma for the entire industry, and we need to embed this even with a resource efficient economy. So this is why this is very interesting, not just looking at the risks, but also at the significant chances of this new economy, where at its core, as I said in the beginning, it's all about values and value generation. So this is the shift I tried to explain, and now you'll probably better understand why I believe the new S-curve is also an S-curve where it's about attitude. What we observe through the age of digitalization, that the attitude of companies and for what they stand becomes much more apparent in future. And this smart resource usage will start with the design of products and will go into many, many new business models. In a resource efficient economy, it's all about more long-lasting products. It's about less waste, meaning circular economy, but it's also new business models like leasing or subscription models for all kinds of products or molecules. We see our customers significantly moving in this direction. When I talk to the big players in the personal care industry, for example, they are already at about 80% biodegradable materials. And this, as I said, is just the beginning. Now, how is BASF doing this transformation internally? I brought you some very concrete examples. So how do we link the SDG targets, which you see on the right-hand side of the slide, to our entire portfolio? We have screened 57,000 product applications. towards their contribution to sustainability and specifically the SDG targets. What we found was that roughly 17 billion of our business, which we call accelerator, do have a significant contribution to the SDG targets. Our aim is to increase these kind of so-called accelerator products with a true and significant contribution to sustainability from 17 billion to 22 billion over the next years to come. And when you see at the bars in the middle, you see they have contributions from cost savings, biodiversity, climate change, energy emission. So it's a very, very structured approach. Now, what are these products? Here are some examples. In the middle, you see Ecovio. It's an example for a biodegradable milk film that you can put on the ground and it's kind of diluting over time. So we do not have the plastic related waste anymore. Or if you look below in Scales, this is an environmentally enhanced insecticide because we do see some severe damages of insects at some parts of the world, but at the same time, we need to be very cautious to the biodiversity at the same time also from an environmental perspective. So these are all new applications as an example for these SDG related solutions that we are trying to bring to the markets. Now, what about CO2? Our industry is quite a significant CO2 contributors, but we have reduced CO2 by 50% over the last decade. Formerly, BASF was at 40 million tons for CO2 emission, and we are now at around 22 million tons. Now, what is our target to get better? What we see at the moment, we need to probably change also from a structural perspective, a lot of plants to methane pyrolysis, which is a new technology. For this, we need new processes in the production. We need a completely build up of renewable infrastructure at different continents and countries. So getting more renewables in the infrastructure will be key. And while this takes in terms of R&D, but also in the infrastructure build-up, we have given ourselves an active carbon management program where we want to reduce further 30% in efficiency of CO2 over the next years. So we are working on various angles on a reduction because we want to get to a zero carbon emission target at 2050. Now, how do we improve the CO2 level? For this, we are one of the first companies, and we will be leading in terms of a detailed CO2 database by each product application. More than 45,000 products have been screened for their CO2 footprint. Why is data important? Because what gets measured gets done. And our customers are asking, so what is the CO2 contribution you have in your product portfolio? So this is not easy to calculate. It needs a lot of know-how. I can only tell you that BASF is not a newcomer in the area of sustainability. We do this ecological and environmental assessment since more than 40 years. So we have a huge data inventory. All in all, more than 8 million data, not only on CO2, but on the whole connections of greenhouse gas and this is what companies need to build up because there is a changing landscape. When you talk about circular economy, this is another paradigm shift in our industry. In the Green Deal, there is a clear definition that we want to introduce more recycling structures. It's about metal recycling, paper recycling, but also chemical recycling. What is chemical recycling? So by now, we have already made the first pilot where we can use plastic waste, bring it back to our crackers and reuse it when it is purified as an oil into our crackers and produce new product. So we can completely close the circle between plastic waste and new products made out of this. Chemical recycling, unless other recycling technologies, has the advantage that it can also use fractions that are not 100% pure, but partially also more inflated with all kinds of substances. For this, we have purification processes. So it can handle mixed plastic waste, all kinds of virgin grade raw materials, And also it has a target to prevent CO2 emission. For this, we have closed various partnerships with Quantafuel and Purium, and this is really something that will come stronger over the next years. But this also means in the age of a resource efficient economy, as said in the beginning, you have to really rethink the whole business model that you had so far. So how to earn money with that and how to work with fees on that. So when you look at the total potential, we see that more than 250 metric tons of circular feedstock can be used by 2025. Our intent is to double our circularity sales to 17 billion euro by 2030, which is significant. And this means we have to prioritize our R&D, CapEx, and M&A targets towards this. Now, you have seen in the way how we implement it in products and innovation that measurement is a key part. Let me now bring you something where Korea is already quite pronounced underway, specifically on the social impact measurement, because we are working with some of the famous companies in your country together for financing the sustainable transformation in terms of impact measurement. What is this? Now, the financial industry has changed the perspective significantly over the last years. And the reason why there is so much more attention on ESG related reporting is, when you look to the left side, the pure economic losses that were generated. This number of 117 billion is from 2018. In 2020, we were already at 220 billion euro weather-related economic losses. And this is macroeconomic impact for the entire industry, but this also means a significant risk for investors and insurance companies. Now, this transformation into a resource-efficient economy needs also a whole transformation, as you saw in our CO2 strategy, of stranded assets, assets that are not Paris Climate Protocol conform. Globally, we have 240 billion of these stranded assets across the entire industries. And this means there is no government out there that can finance this via any taxation whatsoever. So this is why we need to think far beyond our today's reporting standard. This is not only true for us as a company, but also for many ESG funds who are increasingly looking at how are companies looking into SDG implementation as they see it as a mitigation of risk and as a true contribution to this resource efficient economy. On the right-hand side, you see a significant rise of the ESG funds globally. This is a global trend that we observe. 100+ Climate Action is one of the huge investors group from the United States currently looking very, very cautiously and stringently across companies who is complying with the CO2 2050 equals zero target and who is actually really implementing, not only talking greening, who is implementing in the business plan these kind of measures. So who is driving this trend of the investors? When you look to the left-hand side, it's a whole group of women, the next generation millennials, and people with a high net worth income that have a vested interest in driving this process forward. Now, let me come a little bit to the reason why we need to think beyond yesterday. When you look at the balance sheet as we have it today, maybe most people are not aware, but the T accounting system in the financial balance sheet has been invented in the 1500s by Luca Pacioli, an Italian monk and mathematician, friend of Leonardo da Vinci. The issue was there was no climate change nor digitalization at that time. So this is why we were wondering, what is the next step if profit might not be the only impact measurement that we need to do? So it's really about a move from shareholder value, where business was mainly occupied optimizing profit, towards a more system value related approach. Michael Porter already talked about years ago about the shared value principle, where business has to think much deeper about the connection to environment and society. what we see in the next S-curve of resource efficient economy is the so-called system value thought. What does this mean? If we understand that the resources of the environment are limited, that's the framework we are operating in. Society basically is the target for whom we are innovating, because if we don't do it for the society, for whom do we innovate? And business, in the end, is part of the solution. Now, as you know, in the balance sheet as well as the reporting, so far, many companies have partially included environmental and social agendas, but this will now take a step forward. And so 8 years ago, we started thinking how needs impact to be measured in future in order to have monetized values on true impact. Now here you see an example of BASF. We are in the middle, the own operations. The left-hand side is the results of 70,000 suppliers of BASF, and on the right-hand side, it's all our customer industries. What you see here is the orange bars is basically the profit contribution across the value chain. This is what we usually report so far. What is interesting, when you look at the wages that we pay, it's a 70 billion euro contribution. The profit across the value chain is roughly 60 in a sum, but the blue bars, so the salaries we pay, are actually macroeconomically purchasing power of a whole economy. You have seen in COVID-19 that a lot of economies had to go in lockdowns. And for the first time, we could see how coherent the connection is between purchasing power and insecurity in jobs. Because those who have insecurity in jobs, they also have an impact on the total purchasing power that is generated in an economy. This is the reason why a lot of states, countries, and governments have fueled billions of money into the economic system. You know, at the capital market, companies are not valued for their purchasing power contribution so far. But we believe there is true value that companies generate. And so together with SK, one of our partners in the Value Balancing Alliance, we are currently working together with Oxford University and the Side Business Institute, as well as many big standard setting organizations on a standardization of this reporting, where humans for the first time get a value in the balance sheet, because so far they're just a cost factor. And in the age of digitalization, the challenge is robots, you know, don't go shopping. It's actually humans who do. So also the nature, when you look at these bars, the green bars, it's the footprint that we have across the entire value chain. It's a minus 30 billion value. We have really calculated based on all kinds of numbers that we have. The fact that BASF has almost no bars is a size problem. We have 70,000 suppliers on the left and many, many customers on the right. So literally what we have calculated, and we are reporting this now since more than 7 years publicly, what is the true value, not only from a profit, but also from an environmental and social perspective that BASF is generating. Now, this perspective is very interesting because for the first time, we were able to make better decisions. What you see here is a global map of our entire supply chain, including all customers. Where do we generate positive benefits to society through wages and profits? And where do we have challenges where we need to work on improving the state of greenhouse gas and land use? Now, you probably wonder, where do we get all this data from? And don't be afraid, this chart might be a bit cumbersome. I just wanted to show you how deep the thinking is behind this analysis. So we have this kind of frameworks of data where we interlink the employment of people to the increase of purchasing power with World Bank coefficients that we can calculate for the first time, monetarize what is the true value that a company like us is generating. We have the same modeling also for greenhouse gas emission. By the way, these models we have made available to many companies since 2018, because we have founded an alliance called the Value Balancing Alliance, where we share these kind of data, because it's rather complex to do a proper reporting. Now, this alliance, what you see here, is composed by all kinds of companies, and you can see there's SK from Korea, there is Mitsubishi from Japan, and much more companies are currently joining us. So we do a reporting piloting with these companies because we do see there's a changing landscape that IFRS, SASB, and CDP will come up with a global standard, but we are a practitioners piloting platform helping companies to understand how can we actually use the data for better decision making, what data is solid, and how can we get a standardized joint tool, because there's a lot of confusion out there right now. We are doing this in cooperation with the OECD, but we are also funded by the EU government and the EU Commission Life Fund, where we are currently jointly developing the green accounting principles, as well as our partnerships with Global Solutions, who is driving the G20 dialogues in this direction. So if you are interested in what we are doing and the methodology, there's a public paper available on the Value Balancing Alliance website. Please feel free to have a look at it. Now, this is the end of my presentation. It was a rather comprehensive view from the trends we see to how do we implement it as a company towards impact and ESG reporting. But as a fundamental principle, going back to the paradigm shift that I talked about, you know, I see that the next decade is no longer about just optimizing profit. I think in future, business success will be deeply linked to SDGs, meaning how do we as business create value for the environment, society, and for business? So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Saori. This is excellent. I mean, there's so much to jump on here. I'm very happy also to see you highlight the activities that you do at SK. This is terrific. But if we start more at the beginning, the Green Deal, as you said, Green Deals all around. Mm-hmm. They are, if I understand you correctly, definitely opportunities, but there's also some of the risks that come from that. And part of that is also related to the fact, if I combine it with another part of your presentation, that, you know, there's, as you said, no single government can finance all of this. This is something that also came back in the previous webinar we had with Baker Hughes. Can you perhaps expand a bit on that? What can then really be done to properly finance this? Because as you said, without a planet, there's no business. So it is also in the business interest to do this, put very much to the front. So how do we finance this sustainably?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you are right. There's a lot of challenges at this point in time. So let me allude a little bit. What are the different movements I see? And I do see some solutions at the horizon coming up, luckily. So we are in this reporting standard discussions since quite a long time now, as we are from a methodology working very close with the think tank leaders from the university side in this sector, but also with different stakeholders. Now, what I can tell you at the moment that the European Commission is spearheading this movement of reporting. However, there are two things. One is the green accounting principles, which I think is very well, can be very well implemented. But there's also a movement called taxonomy. In this taxonomy, for the first time, and it was a group of investors, NGOs, all kinds of institutions who would like to see more standardized reporting from companies. There is a whole set of data requirements for ESG reporting defined. Now, the challenge here is when we look at the data, at the moment, very little of this data is truly available, be it at big conglomerates, and even worse at mid-sized companies. And this is a challenge in Europe at the moment, where they have now started entering the phase for practitioners to give feedback to them. And this is happening while I speak. So there has to be 3 elements that need to be aligned. Number one, whatever reporting standard we come up with has to be simple. It has to be transferable across industries, because banks want to have comparability between industries. And thirdly, I think the principle of inclusiveness is very important. Why inclusive? Because currently there is a tendency in the banking sector to just invest in green tech. The problem is, if let's take an example, yeah, if you have an oil company and if you have a green wind park technology, there is a high danger that investments just go to the green wind parks in future. The problem is, if we are not inclusive, putting equally transformational incentives to the oil or petrochemical industry or whatever, they will not transform, but they are, as you have seen, the biggest emitter of the planet Earth. So the Paris Climate Protocol cannot be achieved if we just invest in those who are already green. The biggest lever is to put incentives from a financial market perspective into those industries that have more way to go and a bigger emission of CO2. So this is why we are currently in discussion with the EU Parliament how to implement this better, but it is super complex. Now, what has started now out of the United States, the US stock market authorities, as well as China, the finance minister, who is also looking since years now in calculating ecological footprints, there is increasingly clarity around the states that we need one common global standard. And now IFRS, SASB, and CDP have announced last summer that they want to introduce a new organization for non-financial reporting that concentrates on joint impact measurement. And it's very clear that they will come up in the second half of this year with a module concentrating on environmental reporting first as a global standard. I think what we will see is joint global modules driven by IFRS, SASB, and so on, and the G20 circle, and then probably some local differences like the EU, who goes in certain sectors much deeper. Yeah, and I really welcome a global standard, because for companies like us who are simply present in all countries from Japan, Burkina Faso, and others, you know, you cannot change this country by country. So I think that's why I see light at the end of the tunnel, but it is, from a methodology point of view, still a little bit way to go, because the input factors have to be agreed upon, and this is quite challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is exactly the point. As business interest organization, we of course also very much push for harmonization, where we have in Europe we have EU REACH, and in Korea it's K-REACH, which has the same mentality but has significant differences on key parts. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that so global standards are likely to come. However, you still have some changes from region to region. That in itself would mean that it's not as harmonized as one would have. But to the earlier point, you said that it requires quite some engagement between the various stakeholders. What can be done to facilitate that? What can industry do? Or what can organizations do? How can we further drive this harmonization, which is indeed important for everybody? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing we can do is collaborate, because I'm really for competition, but not on the methodology, because it's sunk cost for everyone. This is why, and this was exactly the reason why we founded the Value Balancing Alliance, because we felt there is a voice missing towards the investment community that comes from practitioners, industry that have to use this kind of reporting day in, day out. And so we are sharing all the data in this alliance. So we have 50 million data that we can refer to from all the companies in terms of input factors that we use for our calculation. And last summer, we have just finished the first pilot on exactly that impact statement that you saw on my screen. By the way, this is very consistent also with the green accounting principles of the EU Commission. And so the good news is every single company, even though they haven't done this before, based on the data given, we're able to do this calculation. Yeah. And I think that's a way to go. We have a chapter in Canada where we also work with companies. So we are also intertwined with the IBC. So we have to really interlink more of the KPIs, yeah, to reduce complexity significantly. And from a mindset, we need to get to a mindset where it's clear this is about improvement, not about punishment. Yeah, because the moment when governments start using this against companies, the whole ESG reporting will be in deep trouble. Then people will not comply with reporting or will be very hesitant to do so. So if governments would like to see more transparency, if banks would like to see more transparency, I think a positive enhancement is very important. Absolutely,
the carrot rather than the stick. I think that's a key thing. And as you said, this collaboration. I'm also very happy that you talk a bit more about the Value Balancing Alliance, because indeed that is you refer to the report, but having a bit more of an idea of what's in there is very good. Now we will definitely share the report with people afterwards as well. The Value Balancing Alliance, there are, what I quickly remember from the slide, there's quite a number of companies, but it's still, you expressed a wish to expand that. Well, what is being done to expand that?
Yeah, we do have big companies, but there's also a chapter for medium-sized companies, because this is where we need to have a simplified version. You know, usually in medium-sized companies, there is not so much resources to do such a detailed ESG reporting. And this is why we have started working also with mid-sized companies to really learn what is doable and what data can they use. And we try to feedback this to different standard setters and to the governments, because there's a high interest. There's globally no organization at the moment that works on implementation. It's a little bit the problem in this whole SDG environment, same like the Green Deal. I would say 80% of people are concentrating on putting wish lists together, but the companies, you know, we need to voice up what is doable and where we are overwhelmed, because it is currently super complex. And I think it's important to be clear and crisp in our voice, what is doable and what is not. This is why I can only invite mid-sized companies to join, help us to shape our voice towards governments and standard setters, because we are working with IFRS SASB as a feedback giver, so to speak, and it's a real chance for us. Yeah, we need to voice up the challenges that most people are not even aware of the methodology, and this is something where we would like to help.
Absolutely, and I think that, again, this all ties together beautifully, because the openness by government to listening to fair industry concerns, and rather than just coming up with their wish list, is key. And that would also avoid companies either putting their head in the ground like an ostrich, waiting to things blow over, because things are not going to blow over, that's very clear. Or at the same time, companies at least being accused of engaging in greenwashing, which in itself is bad, but this of course has a longer downwards trend, because the consumers are becoming less and less convinced of the genuine nature of companies' initiatives. Now, on that topic, what do you feel can be done to avoid greenwashing and to further have the consumers be understanding of the truthfulness of companies, in addition to, as you mentioned, having a proper discussion so that companies are less interested to take this bad approach of greenwashing?
Yeah, I think, you know, as I said in the beginning, it starts with the purpose and the attitude for why you do what you do. I mean, we are entering an age where your attitude towards things becomes super, super transparent. And this has to do with digitalization. I think, just giving you an example how we tackle this in BASF, we have a clear purpose that we want to create chemistry for a more sustainable future. But then the question is, what does this mean? And as I showed in the slides, we are trying to put this down on the product level and really measure in terms of sales impact, CO2 impact. It's really about impact measurement and clear target setting. But there's one more element I would like to touch here, and this is something, you know, in a world that is so diverse in terms of values and systems, it's also about responsible business conduct. So what we have, for example, done we have so many topics where we are constantly entering in dilemmas. And these dilemmas are sometimes not easy to solve. Let me give you two examples. One is in the area of agricultural solutions, where there is a clear trend from consumers, less acceptance for chemical plant protection products, while at the same time we need to increase efficiency because we have 40% less surfaces on the ground by almost 50% to nutrition the 3 billion people. So how to balance the biodiversity target and the environmental targets of the SDGs on one side, and how to achieve the efficiency gain that we need to feed the world. So it's really a dilemma between more nature or more humans. And the way how we solve this is via digitalization, where, for example, we use algorithms to optimize profiles of our products. And for these dilemmas, we have installed actually an external advisory group. There are human rights experts, there are NGOs, and we are constantly discussing with them, how would you solve this issue? Another very good example is if you think about e-mobility. While the consumer loves this as an environmentally friendly way from driving from A to B, if you are brutally honest about the supply chains, there's almost no single supplier that I would call perfectly to the standards that we need. Yeah. And so there is still a lot of work to do. Do we shy away from this industry because of that? No. But do we transform it? Do we do our utmost? Yes. Are we perfect? No. And I think that's an attitude I think that we need more and more. It's a brutal honesty, not to hide things, but to really be honest. We are not perfect, but we are very much, we have decided to do improvements all over the place. So we screen, for example, 70,000 suppliers and we categorize them in risk groups. And those who we see as critical, we do audits and do special mitigation plans. Yeah, so this is a long way to go. But that's the only way that gives you credibility over time, because trust can only be lost once. And it is challenging these days, yeah, because we have increasingly the burden of being responsible for entire supply chains.
Exactly. But this humble approach is I wouldn't say refreshing, but it's really something that I fully agree with you. That is necessary, and too often companies are again being put away as the bad guys. And as you rightfully pointed out, there are a lot of contributions that companies make on the negative side that really need to be closely looked at and scrutinized. But indeed, the right activities do involve collaboration again. And I particularly like your note on the transparency, which, if we tie it back also, talks about, related to this financial, to maybe the financing aspect. Now, BASF has achieved a high score in the ESG valuation by ESG Global Monitor, as well as by Morgan Stanley Capital International. Now, can you please explain it in a bit more detail how exactly that further drives it? Again, not just you getting a high score, but how this really fits into the bigger picture, your bigger strategy, this transparency.
Yeah, so we have started since 2017 already with the integrated reporting. We are also trying to comply with the TCFD reporting. These are reports that have specific requests on climate change related action. Now, in this integrated report, we do not only show the financial results, but we also show in detail how much of our CO2 footprint has been improved year by year, how much of these sales contributions add to the sustainable environment. And what I want to encourage also companies, because sometimes companies are afraid to move into the transformation for SDG related targets, but the innovation markets I talked about, they are very interesting because they have an average CAGR between 2 to 35%. This is much higher than our classical businesses that we were in. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you move in this direction, you're not only moving towards innovation towards society, the society is also better accepting it. You have less risks. That's how we see it. So we try to systematically each year reduce the risk factors in our portfolio. I give you one example. One of the downsides in the ESG rating was that we had a product category in agricultural solution. It was called fipronil. So we made a very active decision that we will step out of such product categories within the next 3 years, which is not always easy, but we have decided in our R&D portfolio to systematically look for replacements. So in this ESG evaluation, there's water included, air emission, greenhouse gas, you know, the thing that you saw on my table with the bars before. So these are elements. For each of the elements, we have clear targets and follow through on the entire global level of BASF. And let me give you a concrete example why it's worthwhile investing in ESG related improvements. When we invested, for example, in China already in the 90s, there was the need for wastewater treatment plants. At that time, the rivers were not as clean as today, yeah? And the wastewater treatment plant, we took the best technology there, not the cheapest. We took the one that was ESG standard, from an ESG standard very high. Now, what happened then, to our surprise, in 2012, the Chinese government alluded to companies that do not have a certain standard because of toxic product going into rivers. They requested those companies who do not comply to shut down from one day to the other. And we were very surprised because we haven't seen this before. And we were very glad because we did not have to shut down because we used a better technology already at that time. And this is how we created more sustainable business over time, because we simply did not save on ESG. And this is something I am absolutely sure if you go forward. So you have to set concrete criteria, target, quantitative targets, and follow through. And I think at the core, it's the cultural value of what are you standing for. And I think, as I said, the key mindset is about improvement, not about being perfect, because none of us is perfect, even privately, I think.
Now, that's an excellent point. And again, it's really the humility, which I see from the chat, is also very much appreciated. Now, in line with that, what does it mean for you personally, sustainability?
Yeah, I have to say, the whole thing started in after the financial crisis. That's how I got very much into this reporting thing, because we were sitting, and this is a personal story now, yeah. We were sitting in a coffee shop by 3, and I have to admit, I'm born in 1971. And in Germany, this generation, one of the book authors called us the Generation Golf. Why? Because my generation has never experienced war. You know, we have never had a state of any critical phase. We were lucky that we always had peace. Our parents were hippies in the flower power period. And so the question was, what is the contribution of our generation for the next generation? Because my generation is probably the last one that can still influence digitalization and the impact on humans. And this is why we came to the conclusion, if humans have no value in nature and climate change, you know, nature has no value in capital markets, then what are capital markets actually optimizing, and for whom? And this thought, when we were sitting in a coffee, we came to the conclusion that, leaving the trace of a golf car, because that was the first car when you were a student, is probably not good enough for my generation. It's not enough, because our responsibility is so much bigger. And so this is why at that time, we were just 3 looking into this reporting. That's why we started 8 years ago. We realized, you know, Herein once said, if we would have improved the concept of the candle, the electric light would never have been invented. Yeah, there is a point in time where you have to recognize you have to really go into a paradigm shift here and rethink existing systems. Otherwise, you will never change. And so this is what motivated me personally a lot. So my motivation is, how can we make sure that our next generation, it's our children, still have a future that they can live in, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And this is what drives me very much since then. Yeah, this kind of very personal thought.
No, but it's very good, and I haven't seen all the participants that are with us today, but there's a lot, and I think this is something that would resonate with many of them. Again, leaving a world for our children, and ideally also their children and their children, to keep indeed the earth alive.
I want to encourage the participants. You know, when I was younger in BASF and I wasn't at the board, I always thought, you know, it feels a little bit like when you do a change, you throw a stone into the ocean, it makes plop and the stone is gone. But I was so wrong. Yeah, but every wave that you create in terms of this action or thought has an impact. And I think I'm also partially guilty of this movement of the reporting change, because we also discussed with standard practitioners and so on and so forth. We just have to now bundle it more focused. But my encouragement is, don't think your contribution is minimal. Yeah, I think it's about making the change and going into the solution room that makes a difference.
No, that's excellent. And that reminds me of something that you had earlier in your presentation. You indicated that women, millennials, and high-income individuals are really driving the ESG, SDG, the wish to improve. I don't exactly. How is this measured, and what can we do to capitalize on that?
Yeah, I think this measurement comes from an ESG fund study. They looked into who are the new categories investing and who is pushing this. So as I said, one is, and you can rest assured, with the climate change becoming more severe, I think every year where we have a hot summer, every year where we have droughts, and every year where natural catastrophes increase, the thing that I said today will become under more pressure and more urgent. And this is why I can only say that people on this call, we have to think from a future perspective, not from a past perspective of what we do today. Yeah. And when I looked into this, into the various topics that I spoke today, each one of this is a long-term invest. As I said, and this is why the females probably, they care about their children as well. Probably that's part of the root cause. They are 50% of humans. And I guess they have a personal interest. The millennials generation that we see in our company also increasingly ask, so why are we there? We had that conversation, by the way, when I was in Asia 2012. There was one Asian young man who said to our CEO, so why are we existing? Why should I wake up in the morning and go to this company? Yeah, so what do we do this for? And the baby boomer generation said, look, yeah, this is probably another slogan. We are the chemical company. No, that's not the reason. So the millennials want to know, for what are we doing all this? And I think people who have a high income, they think more deeply what they can do with it, something meaningful. That's probably behind the statistic, I guess.
Okay. No, I think it's that definitely helpful insight. And I also like what you mentioned about the females. Now, this brings it back to another SDG, female empowerment.
Yes.
So we're of course delighted to have you. And if I may ask, Monday was of course World Women Day, International Women Day. What have you or the company done to further promote this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have given a testimonial at the German Economic Ministry to make a clear sign why women mean business. You know, today 50% of humans are females and 50% are men. And we're simply there, yeah. And 80% of purchasing decisions are made by women. And I'm not talking about children nutrition or diapers or something. I'm also talking about cars and houses. All the men on the line probably know how much their wives influence them. So there's a huge knowledge on consumption decision making that I think is a treasure. And especially in Asia, I can only encourage, because I'm half Japanese, you know, I really want to give this message also, especially in Korea, because we have Korean ladies also who are making their way. I personally would not exist on the board if my mother in the 70s wouldn't have decided to leave Japan. And let me give you the reason why. She studied, she was super smart, but she felt she couldn't bring herself in. And today, we have a situation in Japan where this is a big topic as a target, which I really appreciate. But, you know, sometimes I feel they need to participate more. And I think Japan is working on it. And I know Korea is working on it. But there is a treasure that is not taken up yet. And I think this is where a lot of creativity sits. And so I'm personally feeling sometimes like a personal greeting back to Japan, because my mother was brave enough to go outside into the world. Yeah. So just to show, hey, it's doable and we can contribute also economically. And I hope this message also is heard in Asia, because there are so many women waiting for this opportunity.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's, as I said, we organized a seminar on this on Monday. We, at the team, the majority of our staff is female. And it's indeed ridiculous to just arbitrarily leave aside part of the population purely on an arbitrary thing. People are born a certain way, and that's what it is. And therefore, indeed, that creativity founded also or combined with the fact that they are very much involved in the purchasing decisions of households around the world is indeed a clear indication that we should take advantage of those people in leadership and anywhere, like equals, like yeah.
Good. And I think, you know, it's also important for the next generation that boys and girls have a chance to become something in their life, that they can choose the full potential. Because the most unused room worldwide, do you know what it is? It's the room of possibilities. Yeah. And this is, I think, for today's presentation, what I wanted to give as a key message, to be brave enough to really try it out. We might fall down several times because concepts are not easy. It is a transformational process, but if the why is clear, why you do what you do, and if you are clear on how you do it, I think there's a better chance to implement it. And as I said, investment into SDGs going forward is a good one because it will come anyway. So, as I said, if you react, you're probably too late. So it's just better to be proactive, yeah, overall.
Well, I think actually that I cannot think of a better ending for today's webinar. I think it's been wholly inspiring. I think it's great to have the examples of the leadership that you and BASF are taking in driving sustainability, particularly the fact that indeed, if you react, you're too late. That's something that I think all the audience will take with them. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to deliver this to such a worldwide audience. And I can only say, keep up the good fight. And we look forward to having you at some future editions, seminars, whatsoever. Thank you, Saori.
Thank you so much to all the audience, and thank you for listening. It was really a pleasure.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.